The midday sun baked the dust into fine powder as Cole Maddox rode into the outskirts of Wind Hollow, his wide-brimmed hat shielding his weathered face from the glare. His horse, Chestnut, moved at a slow, steady pace, just like Cole liked everything in life. Ever since his wife died, he didn't rush. Didn't talk much. Didn't need much. Today's trip had only one purpose: buy a decent milk cow. His last one died a week ago, and the ranch couldn't run without fresh cream for biscuits or warm milk for his border collie pups. He had no interest in people, no room for nonsense, and certainly no appetite for drama. He'd keep to himself, make the purchase, and be gone by sundown. The town square buzzed with the typical chaos of auction day. Traders, farmers, and old ranch hands crowded around penned livestock, some haggling, others eyeing animals with expert disapproval. Mules brayed. Children ran barefoot between wagons. The air smelled of hay, sweat, and tobacco. Cole dismounted, dusted off his coat, and made his way to the livestock pen, boots crunching in the dry dirt. He was inspecting the hips of a lean brown cow when he heard it, a voice so soft it barely rose above the wind. "It's her last day." He straightened slowly, his eyes narrowing. The voice hadn't come from any man. It was a child's whisper, close and urgent. He turned and found himself staring at a little girl, no older than 7 or 8. She stood just outside the pen's shadows, barefoot in a threadbare yellow dress. Her knees were scraped, her cheeks smudged with dirt, and her hair fell in loose, tangled curls. But her eyes, Lord, her eyes were wide with something deeper than fear. Desperation, maybe. A kind that settled in the bones. Cole crouched a little, unsure what to say. The girl didn't wait. "My mama's sick," she said. "Behind that barn. She can't get up. Mr. Granger says he's going to sell her debt tonight if she don't die first." Cole glanced toward the rear of the lot. An old red barn sagged at the edges, the wood faded and dry like paper. There wasn't anyone back there that he could see. He looked back at the girl. "What's your name?" he asked gruffly. "Emmy." Her voice was clear now, not loud but certain. She took a step forward. "Please, mister, just look at her. That's all." Cole shifted, uneasy. He'd come here for a cow, not someone else's problems. But something about the way Emmy clutched that ragged little doll in one hand and bawled, her tiny fist with the other, made him pause. She reminded him too much of the daughter he'd lost, a long-ago girl with big eyes and a stubborn streak. He sighed. "Show me." Emmy didn't smile. She just turned and started walking around the edge of the corral, past the wagons and noisy bidders, her feet silent in the dust. Cole followed, half cursing himself. This wasn't his place. Wasn't his problem. But his boots kept moving anyway. Behind the barn, the noise of the auction faded to a dull hum. Emmy pointed silently to a shape tucked in the shade beside a pile of discarded feed sacks. Lying there, barely conscious, was a young woman, her dress torn, her skin pale, and her breathing shallow. Her lips were cracked, her hair matted to her forehead with sweat. She opened her eyes slowly and met Cole's stare. Even in sickness, her gaze held a flicker of strength. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped. "She's my mama," Emmy sighed, kneeling beside her. "Mr. Granger says she's not good for work anymore. Says he's selling her debt to the men who come tonight. But she's not dead. She's my mama." Cole's jaw tightened. He didn't say a word. Didn't know what to say. All he felt was a heavy, slow churn in his chest, a feeling he hadn't allowed in years. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to anger. That a woman could be treated like livestock, talked about like a cow ready for slaughter, discarded, when she couldn't work anymore, and that a child could be the only one who cared. He looked back at the girl. "What's her name?" "Lena," Emmy said. Her voice cracked. "She used to sing at the saloon, but she got sick. Nobody sings now." Cole stood silently, boots planted, staring at the woman who lay broken but not gone. He'd buried a wife once. Buried a daughter. Too. He knew what death looked like. And he knew what giving up looked like. Lena wasn't dead yet, and something told him neither was he. He took off his hat, stepped forward, and said just 4 words. "She's not dying today." Cole Maddox hadn't meant to get involved. Not with strangers, and certainly not with sick, broken women and starving children. But standing there behind the barn, staring down at Lena's frail form and Emmy's wide, waiting eyes, something shifted inside him. He knelt beside Lena, placing a calloused hand gently on her forehead. She was burning up fever high enough to make her delirious. Her lips parted slightly, and she muttered something he couldn't quite make out. Cole looked at Emmy. How long's she been like this? He asked. Emmy hugged her ragged doll tighter and said, 3 days. She ain't ate since Friday. I tried to get her bread, but the man said if I begged again, he'd tie me to the post. Cole's jaw clenched. He knew exactly who the man was. Walt Granger, the same drunk, foul-mouthed ranch hand who made a name for himself by collecting debts and breaking people. Cole had heard whispers about him for years, but never had a reason to cross paths. Until now. Where's Granger? Now? He asked quietly, drinking. Emmy nodded toward the saloon down the dirt road. He drinks every time the auction comes. Says it helps him pick who gets Mama. Cole's stomach turned. Who gets Mama? Like she was a mule to trade. He stood, brushing the dust from his pants. Emmy looked up, uncertain. Her voice cracked. You ain't leaving, are you? Cole didn't answer right away. He walked a few paces toward the barn, then stopped and stared out across the auction yard. Laughter rang from the saloon porch, and the low murmur of men bartering filled the air. The same world he'd always known, ruthless, hot and hard. But now it all felt different. He looked back. Emmy was still kneeling by her mother, lips pressed into her doll's fabric like she was praying. The sight cut deeper than he expected. He sighed, adjusted his hat, and walked toward his wagon. Cole returned a few minutes later with his water canteen and a piece of bread wrapped in linen. Emmy took the bread slowly, broke it in half, and tried to coax her mother to eat. Lena turned her head weakly, but Emmy didn't give up. Cole kneeled again and gently lifted Lena's shoulders so Emmy could slide small bites into her mouth. The woman tried to speak. Why? Are you helping? She rasped. Cole didn't answer at first. He wasn't sure he even knew the answer. But then he said, low and steady, because nobody else is. Lena coughed and turned away, a tear slipping down her cheek. You shouldn't get involved. Granger'll kill you for touching his property. You're not property, Cole snapped. Lena let out a dry laugh. He's got papers that say otherwise. Cole sat back on his heels and looked at Emmy, who stared at him with something like hope and fear all tangled together. What does he want for her? Cole asked. Emmy swallowed. He said if someone wanted to buy her debt, it'd be $70. Said she ain't worth much anymore, but he wants the price of her youth. $70. Cole had 43 in his coin pouch and 2 hidden gold pieces sewn into the heel of his left boot. Emergency savings. The price of a good horse or enough seed to replant his eastern pasture. Money he'd planned to spend carefully. Logically. He looked at Lena again, her body shaking beneath the thin quilt. She wouldn't last another day in this heat. And if she died, Emmy would go with whoever Granger sold her to next. No one would protect her. No one would care. Cole stood slowly. Stay here, he told Emmy. Keep feeding her if you can. I'll be back. Where you going? To see a man about a deal. The saloon was half full. Granger sat at a corner table, boots kicked up, a whiskey glass in one hand and a cigar in the other. He was red-faced, drunk, and grinning like he owned the world. When Cole approached, The grin faded. "Well, I'll be," Granger drawled. "Cole Maddox. Didn't know you still came to town. Looking for trouble?" Cole didn't sit. "I'm here about Lena." Granger snorted. "The saloon girl? She's finished. Her debt's mine. She dies, I still get her kid. Fair trade, if you ask me." "I'll pay you." Granger raised a brow. "Oh, you will, huh?" Cole tossed a coin pouch on the table. It landed with a solid thud. 70. "That cover it?" Granger leaned forward, suspicious. He opened the pouch, counted, then sneered. 65. "Still 5 short, and I don't do charity." Cole reached down, pulled off his boot, and used his knife to slice into the heel. 2 gold coins slid out, heavy as justice. Granger's eyes lit up. "Pleasure doing business," he said, scooping them up. "She's yours. But don't say I didn't warn you women like that. They always cost more than they're worth." Cole didn't reply. He simply turned and walked out. He had a woman to save. By the time Cole stepped back behind the barn with the release paper in his vest pocket and the weight of a deal he wasn't sure he'd survive, dusk was falling. The auction had ended, the dust was settling, and wagons rolled out in every direction, loaded with livestock, grain, and debt-ridden hopes. But none of that mattered now, because lying in the shadow of the old barn, where the wind carried the scent of rust and rot, was a woman who had once belonged to someone else. Now, she belonged to herself if she could stay alive long enough to remember what that meant. Emmy looked up when she heard his boots crunch. Her eyes lit up, but she didn't move from her mother's side. "Did you do it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Cole knelt beside them, unbuttoned his vest, and pulled out the folded paper, placing it in Emmy's hand. "She's free. The debt's paid." The girl stared at the paper like it was a holy relic. She didn't understand every word on it, but she understood what it meant. "You saved her." Cole shook his head. "Not yet, but we're gonna try." Lena stirred, coughing again, weak, dry, and painful. Her skin was hotter now, and her breathing shallower. Cole knew that fever too well. It was the same kind that took his wife in 2 days. It didn't wait, and it didn't care how kind someone was or how young. He gently slid one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees, and lifted her as carefully as he could. She was frighteningly light. Emmy followed close, holding tight to the doll in one hand and Cole's sleeve in the other. They reached the wagon, and Cole laid Lena down across a thick wool blanket. Emmy climbed in beside her, tucking the doll under her mother's arm like it was a part of the healing. Cole covered them both and climbed onto the seat, reins in hand. He looked once more toward the saloon. Granger was gone now, most likely passed out somewhere in his whiskey-soaked self-pity. Good. He flicked the reins. "Giddy up, Chestnut." The road back to Maddox Ranch was long and winding, especially with the added weight of worry. Emmy sat silently, her head resting on her mother's stomach, eyes alert even in the fading light. Cole glanced back every few minutes, checking on Lena's breathing, adjusting the blanket, giving her sips of water. By the time they reached the front gate, the stars were out and the night air had turned cool. Crickets chirped. Coyotes howled somewhere in the distance. Cole pulled the wagon into the yard. His dog, Bramble, barked once and ran up to greet them before falling quiet when he saw the cargo. "We're home," Cole muttered to himself. He wasn't sure who he was saying it for. He carried Lena inside his cabin, clearing the cot near the fireplace where he used to read before bed. Now it would be her place to fight the fever. He placed her gently down, added logs to the fire, and poured a small cup of willow bark tea from a pot that had been simmering all day. He hadn't known why he made it until now. Emmy climbed onto the cot, curled beside her mother like a shadow, and stayed completely still. "Will she die tonight?" she asked suddenly. The question hit Cole in the chest. He crouched down and looked Emmy in the eyes. Not if I can help it." By midnight, Lena's fever hadn't broken. She murmured in her sleep, sometimes crying out in pain, other times whispering a name Cole couldn't catch. Emmy stayed awake as long as she could, until finally sleep took her. Still clutching her mother's hand, Cole sat in the rocking chair, watching the fire, his rifle across his lap. Not for protection, but because it was habit. He didn't sleep, didn't even blink much. He just waited and hoped, and tried to ignore the voice in his head that said he'd made a mistake, that he'd traded gold for grief, that saving one woman wouldn't make up for the ones he'd already lost. But then Lena stirred. Her hand twitched, and her lips formed a single word that cut through the silence like a hymn. Emmy. Cole sat forward. The fever hadn't won not yet, and maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a mistake at all. Morning came slowly to Maddox Ranch. A thin line of golden light spilled across the wooden floorboards, warming the room and casting soft shadows on the cabin walls. Lena's breathing was steady now, the rasp nearly gone. She didn't wake, not fully, but the fever had broken. Cole watched from the kitchen table, coffee cup in hand, rifle propped nearby. He hadn't slept. He hadn't dared. Emmy stirred beside her mother, blinking the sleep from her eyes. She sat up suddenly and looked at Lena, then to Cole. "She's breathing better," she whispered, her voice trembling with cautious hope. Cole nodded once. "She made it through the night." Emmy crawled closer to her mother, pressing a hand gently against Lena's cheek. The warmth had faded. Relief poured through her tiny frame, though she said nothing more. Just a small, grateful look at Cole that said more than any words ever could. By mid-morning, Cole had hitched the wagon and headed into town again, not for cows, not for seed, but for help. He needed someone who knew herbs, infection, and care. Not a doctor, they were too few and too far, but Miss Ruthie, the midwife and healer who'd nursed half the town back to health more times than anyone could count. He found her in her garden, her hands stained with sage and soil. "You look like death, Cole Maddox," she said, squinting at him. "Didn't think you were the rescuing type." "I'm not," he said, tying the reins. "But I've got a woman sick with fever and a girl who's lost everything but a rag doll. I figured you were the only one who wouldn't ask too many questions." Miss Ruthie straightened. "You figured right. Let me grab my bag." Back at the ranch, she went to work checking Lena's pulse, mixing herbs into hot water, rubbing salves into her chest. Emmy hovered, asking questions, offering help, never leaving her mother's side. Cole watched it all from the doorway, arms crossed, unsure how exactly he'd ended up with a woman in his bed and a child sleeping on his floor. But something about it felt right. Dangerous, but right. He was just beginning to consider building a second bed when a sound made his blood run cold. HOOFBEATS. Angry. Cole grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. A dust cloud rolled up the trail, and from it emerged Walt Granger, red-eyed and snarling. Two other men rode behind him, hands on their pistols, mouths twisted with the kind of cruelty you only find in men who enjoy collecting debts in flesh. Granger didn't wait for pleasantries. "You think I don't know what you did, Maddox?" he barked, dismounting. "You cheated me, took what was mine." Cole stood still, his rifle lowered but ready. "I paid you." "You paid me for a name on a paper," Granger spat, stepping closer. "That woman was more than debt. She was property. Mine, and I want her back." Cole's voice was calm, flat. "She's not going anywhere." One of the riders behind Granger spoke. "Law says if you got a receipt, it's settled." Granger shot him a glare, then turned back to Cole. "You got no idea what kind of trouble you're in, rancher. You don't just take something that belonged to me and live to raise chickens." Cole raised his rifle slightly, just enough to remind them he wasn't bluffing. "I don't raise chickens," he said. "I bury snakes." Granger's jaw tightened. For a moment, it looked like he'd reach for his gun. But then Miss Ruthie stepped out of the cabin, arms crossed. "You so much as twitch. Walt Granger, and I'll see to it your name's dragged through every church and saloon from here to El Paso," she snapped. "You want to explain to the sheriff why you're threatening a sick woman and a child. You want me to show him those bruises you left behind?" Granger cursed under his breath. The tension broke just slightly. He spat in the dirt, turned, and climbed back on his horse. "You've made an enemy today, Maddox," he growled. "You were never a friend," Cole said. They rode off, the dust cloud fading behind them. Inside, Emmy sat frozen by the door, eyes wide with fear. Cole knelt beside her. "They're gone, darlin'," he said gently. "They won't hurt you or your mama again. I swear it." She threw her arms around his neck and held him tightly. He wasn't used to hugs. Wasn't used to being needed. But he didn't pull away. Not this time. Lena stirred behind them, eyes fluttering open again. She saw the scene, her daughter clinging to a stranger, and whispered through cracked lips, "Why? Are you doing this?" Cole met her gaze, steady and firm. "Because you're not a debt. And she's not a burden." He paused, then added, softer now, "Because maybe I needed saving too." That night, the ranch was quiet, almost too quiet. The coyotes were farther off. The wind had settled, and even the chickens seemed to sense the shift in the air. But inside the cabin, the silence was thick with thoughts no one dared say out. Loud. Lena was resting again. Her color had returned just enough to give hope, and the swelling in her face had started to fade under Miss Ruthie's care. Emmy, curled up on a pallet by the fire with her doll, had finally fallen asleep after Cole sang a lullaby he hadn't sung since his daughter's last birthday. And Cole? He sat by the fire, elbows on knees, staring into the flames. As if they held answers, the gold coins were gone. His emergency savings had vanished in a single desperate trade, but his conscience had never felt cleaner. Still, he couldn't help the questions clawing at him. What happens now? He hadn't rescued Lena and Emmy with some grand plan. He hadn't thought past the moment Emmy whispered, "It's her last day." That voice, that look, it had pulled something loose inside him. Something buried. Something he thought had died with his wife and child. But now, with the weight of it all sitting heavy in his chest, he wondered, had he just bought more sorrow? More loss? Miss Ruthie had stayed late, despite the hour. She stepped onto the porch with him, a cup of tea in hand. "You did a good thing, Cole," she said, voice calm and matter of fact. "Not many men around here would have done the same." "I didn't do it to be noble," he muttered, arms crossed. Asterisk, I just couldn't walk away." She sipped her tea, then nodded toward the window where Emmy slept, curled tight like a pup in winter. "Doesn't matter why you did it. Only matters that you did. That little girl? She won't forget it. Neither will her mama." Cole said nothing. The moon cast long shadows across the dirt yard, silver light touching the rails of the empty corral. He'd come into town looking for a cow, not a family. So what now? He asked finally. "I can't just keep them." Miss Ruthie raised an eyebrow. "Keep them? What are they, stray dogs?" Cole winced. "You know what I mean." "What I know," she said, placing her cup on the railing, "is that Emmy looks at you like you hung the stars. And Lena, that woman's been alone a long time. If you're asking me whether they need you, the answer's yes." "That's not what I'm worried about," he said. "Then what is?" He took a breath, then exhaled slowly. "I'm not good with people. I'm not gentle. I'm not what they deserve." Miss Ruthie looked at him for a long moment. "You're wrong, Cole Maddox. You're exactly what they deserve. You gave up your savings, your comfort, maybe even your safety just to give them a chance. She stepped off the porch. Give her time. Let her heal. Let her choose. But don't walk away just because it's easier than staying. Inside the cabin, Lena stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim firelight. She looked around, disoriented at first, but then saw Emmy safe and sleeping, and her whole body relaxed. Cole walked in quietly, and she turned her gaze toward him. I heard your voice, she whispered. Was trying not to wake you. No. Her voice was rasped, but steady. I meant, earlier, you sang. Emmy hasn't slept through the night since before Granger found us. You have a gift. He looked embarrassed and rubbed the back of his neck. It's not much. It's more than she's ever had, Lena said, her eyes softening. And you gave up something to save us. Why? He met her gaze. Quiet for a beat. Because someone once told me a man doesn't get many chances to do something that matters. And when he does, he better not waste it. Lena didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally, I don't know how to thank you. Don't, he said simply. Just get better. He paused. Then decide where you want to go. When you're ready. She turned her head and stared at the ceiling. I don't have anywhere to go. Cole nodded slowly. Well, then maybe you just stay until you do. Outside, the fire crackled low. Inside, peace settled for now. Cole didn't know what the next day would bring. But for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. He had nothing left to give. And yet, somehow he had everything they needed. Cole had lived through drought, cattle rustlers, and the slow, gnawing grief of burying his wife and daughter. But none of those had prepared him for the rising storm he felt brewing now. Lena was healing. Emmy had started smiling again. The cabin no longer echoed like a tomb, but breathed like a home. And yet, every time Cole walked the perimeter of his land or tightened the latch on the barn door, he caught himself looking toward the road, watching for riders, listening for hoofbeats. Walt Granger wasn't a man who let things go, and Cole knew it. The law might have accepted a debt paid fair and square, but Granger played by his own rules written in liquor and pride. Miss Ruthie had sent word to the sheriff, hoping a formal statement might keep Granger in check. But Wind Hollow's lawman had a weak spine and a love for cards. If Granger came back, Cole knew he'd have to handle it alone. It was just past dusk when the first sign came. Cole had been chopping wood behind the cabin, sweat dripping down his brow when Bramble, his old collie, let out a sharp bark and raced toward the north fence line. Cole dropped the axe and grabbed his rifle. From the rise, he saw it. 3 riders, silhouettes against the fading light, moving slow but direct. One of them carried a lantern, the same as Granger had used the night he came to collect what's his. Cole's gut clenched. He turned back toward the cabin. Inside, Lena was on her feet barely. She leaned against the doorframe, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Emmy sat on the floor near the fire, braiding the tail of her doll. There. Coming, aren't they? Lena asked, her voice quiet but sure. Cole nodded. 3 of them. Granger's likely one. Lena took a breath, her face pale but determined. Then we can't stay. She looked to Emmy. Not with her here. Cole's mouth tightened. Every part of him screamed against the thought. He had just started feeling human again, feeling needed. But she was right. If Granger couldn't get revenge, he'd go after what Cole cared about. Pack light, he said. We'll take the back trail through the pass behind Black Creek. They won't follow in the dark. Within minutes, Lena had a shawl wrapped around Emmy, who clutched her doll tight. Cole hitched Chestnut to the wagon and loaded what supplies he could bread. Jerky, water, a medical pouch from Miss Ruthie. Lena climbed in slowly, every movement a struggle, but she didn't complain. Cole handed her his extra rifle and met her eyes. You know how to use it? She nodded. Learned before I learned to sing." That surprised him. He gave her a small, approving look and climbed up onto the wagon seat. The sun had dipped fully below the horizon now. The air was cooling fast, and the sky above the hills was streaked with dark violet. Cole took the reins, flicked them gently, and the wagon began to roll. They kept the lantern low as they turned off the main road and veered onto an overgrown trail that wound through the cottonwoods and led toward Black Creek Pass. The terrain was rough, the path narrow, and the horses moved slower than Cole liked, but it was the only route Granger wouldn't expect. It was also the same trail Cole had used once, years ago, when he'd buried his wife and couldn't face town. The trail had a way of hiding things: grief, ghosts, and now Hope. Emmy leaned against Lena, wrapped in the shawl, humming softly. It took Cole a moment to realize she was humming a song Lena had sung in her sleep, a lullaby about stars and silver meadows. Cole listened in silence, eyes sharp on the trail. Behind them, far off, he saw lanterns moving along the main road. Granger and his men were looking, but they weren't looking in the right place. Not yet. It wasn't until they reached the creek that Cole finally let out a breath. They crossed over the shallows slowly, the wagon wheels clunking through the stones. On the other side stood an abandoned trapper's cabin, long forgotten, but sturdy enough for a night's rest. Cole helped Lena down and carried Emmy inside, laying her on a bed of blankets he had packed just in case. Lena stood at the doorway, watching him. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "You could have just let us go." "I could have," Cole said, glancing at Emmy asleep beside the fire. "But then what would I have left?" Lena's eyes shimmered in the firelight. "You're risking everything," she whispered. "Not everything," he replied. Asterisk, just what I don't want anymore." He paused. "I don't want to be alone." Outside, coyotes howled into the wind. Inside, 3 lives sat in quiet safety for now. Tomorrow would bring more danger, but for tonight, they had escaped. They had chosen each other, and that, Cole thought, might be the beginning of something worth staying alive for. Asterisk. Dawn broke over Black Creek Pass in a pale blush of pink and gold, but there was no time to admire it. Inside the abandoned trapper's cabin, Lena was struggling again. She'd stayed strong through the escape, through the cold ride, through comforting Emmy by firelight, but now her strength was slipping. Cole knelt beside her, his brow furrowed deep. Her breathing was rapid, her skin cold and damp. She kept drifting in and out of consciousness, murmuring half-formed thoughts, sometimes Emmy's name, sometimes songs that never quite left her lips. Emmy sat close, holding her mother's hand, like she might disappear. "She was better," Emmy whispered, eyes wide and scared. Asterisk, she was getting better. Cole didn't have the heart to lie. She pushed herself too hard last night. Her body's fighting to hold on. "But we're not giving up, all right?" Emmy nodded, but her lip trembled. Cole knew the look in her eyes. He'd seen it in his own mirror once. The face of someone already bracing for loss. He wasn't going to let that happen again. Cole saddled Chestnut fast and rode hard down the backside of the ridge. The town of Dry Gulch, though smaller and rougher than Wind Hollow, was closer. There was no doctor, but there was a healer who lived on the edge of the river. Old Mebel, a reclusive widow with sharp eyes and hands like magic. He'd heard the stories. Folks said she once brought a newborn back from the edge with nothing but herbs and a prayer. Others swore she could track a fever like a bloodhound. He didn't care if the stories were half lies. He needed her. When he arrived, Mebel was already standing on the porch with a kettle in her hand, as if she'd been expecting him. "The woman's in the cabin behind the pass?" she asked, her voice gravelly but clear. Cole blinked. "How'd you?" she smiled faintly. "Dreamed of a man riding through fire. Thought he might stop here." He didn't waste time with more questions. She's burning up. Slipped back under. Brought her out of one fever already. She might not survive. Another. Mabel nodded, her face unreadable. Then let's not waste time. Back at the cabin, Emmy ran to the door when she saw them riding up. Her hair was a mess of curls, her eyes wide with hope and fear. She hasn't moved much, she said softly. Asterisk, just mumbled a little. Mabel went straight to work. She crushed herbs, boiled water, and used a sharp-edged silver spoon to pry open Lena's mouth and feed her drops of a blackish tincture that made Emmy wrinkle her nose. Cole stood back, his fists clenched at his sides. He hated how helpless he felt. Hated how familiar this all was, watching someone fade and not knowing if they'd ever come back. Mabel dabbed Lena's forehead with a cool rag, whispering under her breath in a language Cole didn't know. She lit a clay pot filled with what looked like moss and pine needles, filling the cabin with a strange earthy scent. This will pull the sickness out, she murmured. If she wants to live, she'll come back. And if she doesn't? Cole asked. Mabel didn't answer. She just stirred the pot. Night fell again. Emmy drifted off in the corner. Cole stayed at Lena's side, watching every breath. Mabel dozed in a chair, arms crossed, eyes closed but not asleep in the way normal folks sleep. She was listening, waiting. It wasn't until sometime past midnight that Lena stirred. She gasped deep and sudden, and her eyes flew open. She sat upright, coughing, then fell back into Cole's arms. Emmy? She rasped. Cole turned, his heart pounding. She's here, he said. Asterisk, she's safe. So are you. Lena stared at him like she didn't believe it. I thought I was dying, he smiled. Just barely. You were. But we don't let folks die around here unless they're ready. Lena reached for his hand. Her fingers were weak, but her grip tightened slowly. Thank you, Cole. He swallowed hard. Don't thank me yet. I'm still figuring out what comes next. She gave a weak laugh. Asterisk, you and me both. The next morning, Mabel packed her things and left without a word. But before she rode off, she stopped beside Cole and handed him a small pouch of herbs. She'll need this for a while. Steep it every morning. Let her rest. Keep her warm. Keep her wanted. Cole nodded. Asterisk, I will. Mabel looked at him with something almost like pity, but not quite. Asterisk, you've already started a fire, Mr. Maddox. Just be sure you don't walk away before it burns clean. Inside, Emmy was curled beside her mama again, humming a lullaby in a voice so soft it might have been a breeze. Lena opened her eyes and smiled. For the first time, it wasn't just gratitude. It was hope that the fever had passed. But the quiet lingered. 3 days after Mabel left, Lena was stronger. She could sit up on her own now. She'd begun eating solid food again, small bites, slow chews, her eyes scanning the room like she still wasn't sure she was allowed to be here. But the fire in her hadn't gone out, it had only retreated. Gathering strength, Cole watched her from the doorway as she braided Emmy's hair with fingers still trembling. Emmy sat cross-legged in front of her mother, perfectly still, like she understood the sacredness of this moment. Neither of them said much. Cole turned and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool with morning dew, the mountains still holding their shadows. His rifle leaned against the railing beside him. It hadn't left his side since the night Granger showed up. He hadn't seen Granger since. But that didn't mean the man had given up. Later that morning, Miss Ruthie arrived. Her horse was soaked in sweat. She didn't bother with a hello, just dismounted, marched up the steps, and said, "You've stirred a hornet's nest, Maddox." Cole raised a brow. I figured. She dropped her bag by the door. Walt Granger's been making noise all over Wind Hollow. Says you kidnapped the girl's mother. Says he wants her back. The sheriff's too yellow to stop him, But he can't. Act until he's got proof you crossed the law. Cole crossed his arms. She was dying. I didn't take her, I kept her alive. Ruthie gave a half smile. Asterisk, asterisk. That's the part that's got him riled. She's alive and now he's lost. His grip. Inside, Lena stirred and slowly stepped out onto the porch. She leaned against the post, pale but steady. I'll go back, she said, if it keeps Emmy safe. Cole turned on her, his voice low but hard. The hell you will. Lena met his gaze. He'll burn this place down if you don't hand me over. You've done enough, Cole. You don't owe me. He stepped closer, cutting her off. I don't owe you anything. That's true. He paused, voice rough. But I care. That's not debt. That's choice. Lena stared at him, stunned by the way he said it, not like a man staking a claim, but like a man admitting he finally felt something again. Miss Ruthie watched the two of them for a long moment, then said quietly, if you're going to stand together, you'll need to stop hiding. Face Granger. Let the people see the truth. Lena looked down, but I'm nobody to them. A runaway from a man with power. They won't listen to me. Ruthie gave her a look. You're alive. You're brave. And you're a mother who risked everything for her daughter. That makes you more than nobody. That night, the three of them sat in the cabin as the fire crackled low. Emmy was already asleep on a pile of blankets, her arms curled around her doll. Lena stirred the pot of stew slowly, her motion steadier now. Cole sat nearby, not eating, just watching her. Why did you do it? She asked after a while, without looking up. Asterisk, asterisk. Why keep going when it got hard? You could have walked away the moment I collapsed in your wagon. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, asterisk, asterisk, because the night I buried my wife and daughter, I told myself I didn't want to feel anything again. And then you and Emmy showed up, and suddenly I felt. He looked away, jaw clenched. It scared the hell out of me. Still does. Lena smiled softly, her fingers still around the wooden spoon. It scared me too, she admitted. Asterisk, asterisk, letting someone care again? Letting myself believe someone might actually stay. Cole finally met her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, Lena. Not unless you tell me to. She didn't respond with words. She reached out, slow and unsure, and laid her hand over his. No promises. Just a beginning. But across the valley, under cover of night, Walt Granger was planning something very different, and he wasn't coming to talk. The next morning felt wrong the moment the sun rose. The birds were quiet. The air was too still. Even Chestnut, Cole's steady gelding, kept pawing at the ground like he sensed something creeping over the ridge. Cole stood outside the cabin, rifle slung across his back, scanning the tree line. The sky was painted in soft colors, lavender and blue, but his gut told him the peace wouldn't last. Inside, Lena was helping Emmy dress. Her voice was calm, but her eyes flicked constantly toward the window. Miss Ruthie hadn't come back from town, and Cole didn't like that either. Just after breakfast, he heard it, the sound of hooves, several, coming fast. Cole stepped out onto the porch, hand on his rifle, 7 riders. Walt Granger led the pack. His pale suit was dusty from the trail, but the sneer on his face was fresh. He stopped 10 paces from the cabin, his hand resting casually on his revolver. Morning, Maddox, he drawled. You got something that belongs to me. Cole didn't move. You lost the right to say that the day you hit her. Granger chuckled. That's mighty righteous for a man harboring a known fugitive. From inside, Lena stepped out beside Cole. She wore Emmy's old bonnet to shield her face, but she kept her chin high. I'm at your property, Walt, and I'm not running anymore. Granger's smile faltered just a bit. You think this is over? You think one worn-out rancher and some mountain witch can stop me? You're not in town anymore, Cole said coolly. Asterisk, asterisk, and out here, the law doesn't wear your boots. The 6 men behind Granger shifted uncomfortably. 1 or 2 looked like they hadn't signed up for a shootout. Granger noticed and scowled. I'll give you one last chance. Lena, come with me, or I swear on my daddy's grave, I'll burn this shack to the ground with you in it. Suddenly, a shotgun cocked behind him. Then you'll burn with her, said Miss Ruthie, stepping out from behind a pine tree, leveled and ready. Asterisk, asterisk, because I've got buckshot with your name on it, Walt. The other men jumped. Ruthie hadn't. Come alone 2 of the older ranch hands from Cole's property had flanked the ridge. They weren't warriors, but they were loyal. Granger now had a choice: fire and risk dying, or walk away and lose everything. He snarled, You think this is justice? Cole stepped forward, his voice steady. No, this is protection. You? Don't get to cage her anymore. Lena took off her bonnet. Her face was tired, but unbroken. Asterisk, asterisk. You don't own me, Walt, and you sure as hell don't own my daughter. Something in Granger's face shifted. Not fear, but the realization that the old control was gone. He spat in the dirt, then backed his horse away. Asterisk, asterisk. This ain't over, Maddox. Not by a long shot. Cole didn't blink. Then you better. Make your next shot count. Granger turned, riding off without another word. His men followed some without looking back. The moment they were gone, Lena sagged. Cole caught her before she could fall. That night, the cabin was quiet again. A peace. Settled and not perfect. But Real. Emmy drew a picture with charcoal on old paper, a stick figure version of Cole, Lena, and herself. She held it up proudly. This is us, she said. Asterisk, asterisk, our family. Cole's heart squeezed. He looked to Lena. She was sitting by the fire, hair down, eyes soft. She's right, she said quietly. Asterisk, asterisk. You didn't have to fight for us, Cole, but you did. He looked at her, steady. Asterisk, asterisk, because you're worth it. She smiled, and for once didn't look away. Outside. The night was deep and still, but this time it wasn't silence filled with fear, Dad. It was the silence of freedom earned of love, planted in ashes, and it was only the beginning. Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it came, it bloomed like a promise. The valley behind Cole's cabin burst into color. Wildflowers painted the meadows. The creek bubbled clear with melted snow, and every trail that once felt haunted by grief now felt like part of something living, something safe. It had been 3 months since Granger's last stand. He hadn't returned. Word was he rode south looking for trouble somewhere it would still obey him. Some said he got into a bar fight in Dodge and never got up again. Cole never asked. Some ghosts you don't chase, they vanish when you stop fearing them. Cole had just finished building the new barn wall when he saw Emmy running down the path barefoot, pigtails flying. Mama says dinner's ready, and I picked the prettiest carrots. She beamed. Cole smiled, brushing sawdust from his hands. Hope you didn't steal the ones I was saving. Emmy giggled and darted ahead of him. Inside the cabin, Lena stirred the stew pot over the fire, apron tied loosely at her waist. Her hair was messier these days, always curling out of its braid. She looked at him like she always did now, like she didn't flinch, didn't hide, didn't wait for the world to fall apart. Because a DIDN single quotes T. Not this time. They ate together on the porch. Emmy picked flowers out of her soup and lined them up on the table. Cole just shook his head. You know, most folks don't garnish their stew with daisies. It's for the look, Emmy said solemnly. Lena laughed, really laughed, and the sound was warmer than the fire. After dinner, Emmy dozed off in her mother's lap. The sky turned gold and then soft gray. Cole stood, watching the stars come out one by one. You never told me your wife's name, Lena said softly. He hesitated, then answered, Carolyn. And our daughter was Millie. They died on a night like this. Lena didn't ask for more. She just held Emmy tighter and said, asterisk, asterisk, they'd be proud of you. He looked at her, at the woman who once couldn't meet his eyes, who had shaken from fever and fear in his wagon, who now watched him. With calm certainty, I think I was meant to find you, he said. Asterisk, asterisk, not because I could fix you, but because saving you saved me. Lena reached out, took his hand. We saved each other, Cole. That's what real love does. 2 weeks later, Cole took them into town. It was Emmy's first time in a proper dress shop. Ruthie had sewn her a yellow gingham dress that flared when she twirled, which she did. A lot. Miss Ruthie hugged Lena like a sister. Townsfolk who once turned their heads now tipped their hats. No one said Walt Granger's name aloud, but his absence was its own kind of justice. At the county office, Cole filled out the papers. Name, Emmy Grace Caldwell. Guardian, Cole Maddox, legal custodian. Reason for custody, family by choice. They left the building as the sun spilled over the courthouse steps. Lena was quiet. You really want to raise her? She asked. Cole didn't hesitate. I already am, she nodded slowly. And what about me? He looked at her with something more than affection. Something settled. You're already home. That evening, back at the ranch, Lena stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the horses graze. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned into him. Did you ever think, she whispered, when you rode into town just to buy a cow, you'd end up with a daughter, a woman, and a second chance? He chuckled. Honestly? No. And now? He kissed her temple. Now I can't imagine anything else. The wind rolled through the grass. Emmy's laughter echoed as she chased a butterfly near the fence line. The mountains stood tall around them, not as walls anymore, but as shelter. This wasn't just survival. This was living. This was the kind of ending that didn't come all at once, but grew, piece by piece, like roots taking hold in good soil. Because sometimes the family you need finds you. And sometimes a whisper in a barnyard becomes the beginning of a life worth staying for.